Well, the European Union is the first trading partner for China, and I think that's really the one thing which has sort of dominated our thinking for quite a while. Contrary to the United States, the European Union is not militarily engaged in Asia. So I think for a longer time we have seen China mostly as an opportunity, and some of the, let's say, more worrying aspects of China's rise maybe have surfaced a bit later in our thinking. Otherwise, I'm not so sure that on aspects related to the international order, our thinking is really much different from that of the United States. Obviously, we are not, in the same sense as the United States, a strategic competitor of China. On the other hand, we have always emphasized that we see China's role increasingly important as a responsible member, stakeholder was a phrase coined by an American commentator in the international economic but also political system. And therefore, I think we have seen in the last years a few developments where we think that China maybe has not really lived up to all of our expectations. Well, I think this is a question which could simply be answered by China today is maybe not as close to the international order than a couple of years ago. I hesitate to give this a rather simple answer for the reason that the international order over the last 10, 15 years has changed. And therefore, when China sort of entered the international order, and many observers think that 2001, when China joined WTO, is sort of a decisive year where we thought that this is really the start of a full integration of China into the world economy. And looking back, of course, we see that recently we see more mercantilist trends in China's economic behavior. Trade friction is something which is coming up. On the other hand, we shouldn't really overlook that China is not only on the receiving end of the international order, it's also increasingly shaping the international order, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So I think we should jointly, together with China, think on how we really see this international order evolving. Because, as I said, it has changed for many reasons. Some say it has changed after 2008, after the Lehman shock. Some people say this change occurred much earlier. So I think we look at the moment more on the security side. I think when in 2001, when we thought China was sort of really starting to integrate the international system, we were more looking at the economic and trade side. In the meantime, we see regional friction. We see claims of China expanding its red lines, its core interests. We see territorial ambitions, which of course changed the equation somewhat. So it shifts more to the balance of power, it shifts more to the security area. And this is also the reason why the European Union increasingly focuses on these aspects. We see ourselves directly affected by developments in the region, not only in terms of our trade and economic interests, but also in terms of our security interests. I think that one of the reasons why we always tend to be surprised a bit by a number of aspects of China's rise is because it has happened so fast. 10 years ago, Japan's GDP was still more than 3 times the size of the GDP of China. And at the time, the projection was that China would sort of catch up with Japan in terms of GDP sometime between 2015 and 2020. Now, as we know, it happened quite a bit earlier. And this not only surprised Japan, I think even though we could add up the numbers and make the projections, I think it came still as a surprise that China's growth basically happened for such a long time at such a high rate without really an interruption. And therefore, we are surprised sometimes by the fact that there is now more civil unrest. It seems there are more incidents as reported by the Chinese. There is the fact that pollution and the degradation of the soil, the water, the air is progressing also much faster than many people had thought possible. But it's all a bit linked, to this development, which, because of the size of China, is so stupendous. Now, a lot of people today seem to be surprised by China's more assertive behavior, some say aggressive behavior, for instance, in the neighborhood. Why is China now at loggerheads not only with Japan, but also with the Philippines, Vietnam, others? Well, it should not maybe come as such a surprise. People were hinting at the increase in defense spending, but then it was not completely out of line with GDP growth, and in a way it was also fairly predictable. What people focus on rightly, I think, is a lack of transparency and maybe either a real or a perceived lack of intentions of the Chinese leadership. We had the leadership change, which was completed only this spring. It was only the second leadership change, which went about peacefully in sort of an orderly way in accordance with what was sort of agreed on by the leadership in the late 90s. But foreign policy, the definition of China's role in the world is very much determined by its own domestic political processes, which appear to outsiders necessarily opaque. And this is, I think, not one of the surprises, but one of the reasons why outside observers, China's partners, are always left a bit puzzled, by decisions which are taken by different procedures than we are used to.